Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome. We officially call the meeting to order of the Salem Building Committee meeting on June 20th, 2024. The time is 6:31. Because we do not have a quorum, we're gonna go out of order. And we're going to save items 2 and 3, which is the approval of the minutes, for when we obtain a quorum. So we'll just skip to number 4, if that's okay with everyone, which is introductions.
So I thought since we have new members tonight, we could go around, our OPM team is doing this because they don't know who we all are necessarily, so.
That's it.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind turning your.
It's like a reveal, right?
Oh, yeah.
Neil, do you wanna kick off?
Yeah, sure. I'm Neil Duffy. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Resiliency for the city.
Jenna, I'm City of Salem resident.
Nancy Ricciarelli, and just finished the freshman year twins.
I'm Barron's principal at Salem High School.
Mario Souza, Salem High School CT Director.
Anna Friedman, Finance Director for the City of Salem.
Not like the gal in there.
Nate Bryant, Salem resident.
Rick Jones, City of Maine, Salem resident.
I am Margaret Wood. I'm with Answer Advisory.
I'm Kim Carter. I'm with Community Foundation, working with Answer Advisory.
Deborah Marai with Answer Advising.
Christian Cuervo with Answer Advisory.
Joe Clausey with Answer Advisory.
Dessa Hunt, Salem High, CT student representative.
With Valencia, Latino Leadership Coalition.
Pete Donato, William Kaplan Jr., and para students.
Chris Abello, Director of Communications, Salem Public Schools.
UC Alphagus, Director of Facilities, Salem Public Schools.
Lisa Golden, SPS liaison for the project.
So I was just gonna say a few words. You want to vote?
Yeah, So now that we do have a quorum, if you have your agenda, we're going to item 2, which is the minutes from the March 21st meeting. So I need a motion to approve the minutes of the March 21st meeing.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Motion by Keith, I need a second. Second by Mario. Any questions, comments, edits? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And moving on to the approval of minutes from the April 25th meeting. The motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
Motion made by Rick, second?
Second.
Second by Matthew and Beth Ann. Any questions, comments, edits? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Back to you, Rick.
Great. So item 5. So I'm gonna just take a minute to talk about our OPM selection process. The subcommittee, Jenna, Matt, Anthony, I saw you walk in. Oh, Anthony, Betsy, Lisa, thank you all again so much. I just want to talk about a few of the things that we think separated Answer Advisory from the other 3 finalists. There were 9, was it 9 or 11? 9 total applicants.
There were,
Yes, 9 total applicants, and we shortlisted and interviewed 4. Out of 208 points, I think they won by 0.4 of 1 point or something crazy like that. It was a very close vote. But the things that differentiated them, particularly Deb and Christian and Joe, the fact that they're working on a very similar project, like a $130 million project, smaller than ours, but that they are a team that is all working together on something that's similar, and the whole team would come over to our project. That was really important to us. Kim Carter, who you'll learn a lot more about, the inclusion of her on the team as an academic programmer. The designer selection process, which is next, the designer will definitely bring a academic programmer as part of their team, but having Kim on board as a check and as a challenge to that, the assumptions that person might make, we thought would make for a better outcome for Salem. Among the people that we interviewed, they had the best discussion. They were really the only people who talked about, but also had a very good discussion of the idea of the funding and the vote that we're going to have to fix at some point in this process. And alongside that, they talked really well about cost control and how you balance scope and cost. And then they had a very good discussion of engaging diverse populations, which is what Salem's all about. And Anthony wrote a very good summary that is called part of the public record that will have everybody, but you're welcome to read all the detail of all the interviews and all the review comments. And I think just in closing, I think the general feeling was that this would be an important project to answer, that we interviewed some much larger national scale firms, and we just felt like we would get more eyes on the project from this team. So that's how we arrived at our conclusion. Does anyone who was part of the process have anything to add? Awesome. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Margaret.
Actually, to Deb.
To Deb.
Because Deb is our team member.
Thank you. Joe was gonna help move the slides forward. So the next slide just shows the agenda, but it's pretty much everything you are seeing. We're gonna talk a little bit about the upcoming milestones in the process, review the designer selection timeline, and talking about the committee, the subcommittee for that. Discussion of subcommittees, working groups, discussion on the MSBA reimbursement, to touch a little bit on what Rick was saying from our interview that we had brought up. Update on community discussion on the grade reconfiguration, some discussion of future meetings, which will be important to start to think about what's coming up in the future, particularly for this committee. And that should be about it. So on the next slide, this is the team that we presented at the for our selection, both in our response to the RFQ and then also at the interview. Most everybody except the middle person on the bottom, who's a cost estimator, Peter Bradley, everybody else was at the meeting. So myself as the project director and project lead, Christian and as project manager, and Joe as assistant project manager, we're currently working on a K-8 project in Lawrence. It's a pretty big project, just under about 117 construction, almost 150 total project cost. And then Margaret, who is taking a strong lead at the beginning here, process and also community engagement. Will be one of her priorities going forward. Margaret is working with Carlos, who we proposed as the clerk for the project. It's quite a ways from now, but Carlos is currently working with Margaret on a project in Holyoke. And Kim Carter, who we'll talk a little bit more about later. So that is the team we presented. And for now, I'm going to hand this over to Margaret to talk about process and timeline.
So we thought it would be a good idea to sort of start the discussion with you with a kind of visual of what the overall duration of this project might be, because I think it's a long process in a nutshell. And so what this shows, by the way, without any input from the design team, right? So the design team is going to come on board in October, and they may feel that some of the design periods need to be longer, for instance, probably not shorter than what I've done, but what this tells you overall is that if this project follows the typical trajectory for an MSBA project of this size, that we might reasonably anticipate that the renovated or new building would be open for the fall of 2031, which is a heck of a long time, but just to sort of give you a sense of the kind of big milestones. And the next slide, I'm going to get into more detail for the phase that we're in now. The first piece of this is the sort of team assembly or team selection. And the the timeline for the designer selection that the MSBA has provided tells us that we're probably most likely going to have a designer on board in October. So that's the orange bit. So then there are kind of two big pieces to the feasibility study, which are shown in blue. So one is the study itself, which involves itself two pieces. So one piece is developing an educational program for the building, which obviously drives the design process. And then secondly, deciding what options are going to be considered as part of the process. Now, the good news about this is, given that we're in Salem, you know, there isn't a heck of a lot that needs to happen between now and Halloween. So, and I've been working in Salem, I know, like, it would be very hard to have meetings here in September and October that were public meetings. So if you look at the schedule, again, the first couple of months of this, I've shown 9 months for feasibility study, which again, it might be a little bit longer, it wouldn't be shorter. About the first couple of months of that are writing the ed program with the district, and then the second piece is looking at the options. There's also a whole piece that the design team does that is around documenting the existing conditions, which is information that will get presented here, but you're not going to have, this group isn't going to have a role in it, right? It's going to be the designers and the engineers collecting the information about the site conditions and the building conditions and all of that information. So that's kind of going on in the background. Then in this schedule, you can see the second piece, the line that says preferred schematic. That is really where you're looking at the options in depth and picking one, and then sort of doing, that's really the period, I think, December, January, February, where you're going to be having public conversations about what options should be considered, and then moving forward between kind of March, April, May, finalizing that, and then you actually do estimates of the selected options. And at the end of the preferred schematic line, you are making a submission to the MSBA that says, we've looked at all these options, we have all this information about the site, we're gonna do this. So at that point, yes, please interrupt.
So at the preliminary design program, at the conclusion of that in February, are we making the decision about the grade configuration?
You are going to want to make the decision about the grade configuration by the time you make the preliminary design program.
Before we go into the first
submission. Because it's good, you can choose, you can say, well, we're going to do options, right? But you have to say, well, one of the options is going to be this, one of the options is going to be that. Right? Actually, I'm going to get up and point to this because
So what month is that? Oh, a month?
well, the looking at options is going to start in November. In November and December, but the conclusion yes, thank you. That would be me tripping over the wire. So So this period right here, this is decision on which options to study, is kind of ending around February, right? So you're going to want to have community engagement. Again, thank goodness it's after October, right? You're going to be wanting to have community engagement towards the end of this year about what the choices are. Then here, having decided which choices this is an opportunity here to have community engagement on those choices, right? So it's sort of a two-step piece. And right there, kind of, about this time next year, you're going to be saying, that's what we're doing. Then it gets easier for you guys, because at that point, then it's really on the backs of the design team, right? That 9-month period, which again, the design team, when they're selected, may want more time. that 9-month period is to develop a schematic design that is sufficiently robust that it can be the basis of a cost for the project that the city can depend on, right? And I want to say, if whoever is hired for the design team, that's really, really critical that enough time be taken. You don't want to rush that because, this is a complicated site, as you all know, and there's sort of all sorts of issues. There's an existing school there, there's a lot of rock, there's, all kinds of issues about circulation and master planning. So you really, 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 that period is critical because whatever you end up with at the end of that, that's what you're signing agreement on, that's what you're taking to the voters. So, having done that, the next piece is,
Can I ask one question again?
sure.
So I think the big decision that every school faces in this game, right, is renovation, new construction, or a combination thereof.
Right.
So we have that decision, and then on top of that, we have the grade configuration decision.
That's-
Are we looking at options for all of those things at the same time? Or are we making the grade configuration decision and then looking at renovation, addition, new construction?
It's up to you.
Okay.
I will say there are some communities, I remember looking a number of years ago at, I think it might have been Lincoln, was doing a project and they had like 8 options.
Well, wouldn't the grade options inform the second product? So wouldn't it make sense to do the grade options first?
Yeah.
Okay.
It would make it easier. But if you want to keep both on the table, you can, do mix and match. I think it makes it tougher from a community conversation as well as from a design perspective. You sort of the more options you do, the more time you need to do that. But if the way the conversation goes means you want to do, to your point, Rick, the absolute minimum that the MSB requires as part of the process is 1 grade configuration, a straight renovation, a renovation and addition, and a new construction version. Now, one of the things that's true about your high school is if you do existing high school, if you do the math on either of the grade configurations, the MSBA has a sort of template for how many square feet per kid you can build that they will reimburse on. If you do the math for either 912 or 712 for your high school, it's a smaller building if you started from scratch. You have a very, very big building. I don't think that's news to anybody here. That is a super large building, right? So also in the mix here, I think what we're going to find is as we get into this, there are going to be some really big spaces. I mean, the one that has stood out to Deborah and myself is the gym, right? You have this like pretty astonishing gym, frankly, that's bigger than you could build if you're going to build a new one. So the complexity, I think, is going to come in the renovation addition version. Like, you don't need to add space here, but you need different kinds of space. And you have some spaces that you couldn't build new like that. And then you have this whole issue of how's that going to work on the campus.
I'm asking this in part because I'm imagining that one of the questions we will feed from the community is, in terms of grade reconfiguration or not, what's the cost delta?
Yes.
And we will not know that until into.
Actually, right
We will do
here,
some estimating
at
in
this
there.
point,
Okay.
we actually,
And I'm sure the school committee wants to know that too.
and I'm going to tell you, you don't have enough information at that point to have numbers that you could vote on, right? You should think of this as order of magnitude estimating, like which is more, which is less, about where we are. The estimate, I will say, Peter Bradley, who's the estimator, he every once in a while I call him and I say, so people want to know why this is more than the quote unquote preliminary design program estimate. Like, you can't use those numbers for this purpose. Like,
it's a diagram, right? It's just like a couple of boxes on a piece of paper that's telling you how many square feet you have, right? There's not enough information. It's all square foot. How many square feet is the HVAC going to be? How many square feet is the site work, right? It's very order of magnitude. At that level, that you have the range. Right?
Next.
Down
So does that also include an estimate on reimbursement?
we can do an estimate on the reimbursement, yeah. And I think it's really important because unless you can see that, you can't see what the cost. That being said, there won't be a huge amount of difference in the options on this. We're going to talk a little bit later about how the reimbursement works. But you do get extra points for the reuse of the building relative to the new, building a totally new building. But there are other offsetting costs to it. So it's complicated. But yeah, we can do that.
After Jen, we're gonna probably press pause on questions until you're done with your presentation.
Okay.
It'll be your, no, that's okay. Go ahead, Jen. It's Rick's fault.
And you might have been getting this, but really during that whole schematic design phase, when the designer's doing a ton of work,
Yeah,
there actually is a lot of work on the community to get to the point to vote.
there is.
Because you're voting right there in spring, that's your time to get
Yes, I
to
agree.
everybody, so you can actually vote in the spring of
That's true.
Because that's gonna be basically your best time. 'Cause by then you'll know a lot more about it and we'll be able to communicate the costs and the impact of it.
So, in this period, the designer's going to be coming in and developing the design. You may want, when you get to this point, to have a design subcommittee who's giving feedback, and then this committee, full committee, meets monthly, right? But there's a lot of design work going on, but as you say, Jenna, huge amount of community engagement piece. So let's sort of talk about then how you get the money. So, what we did here to lay this out was we laid out what's probably an earliest vote, and I would say arguably a latest vote. Again, the designer may have a different opinion, but, having a vote that aligns with the sort of standard idea of elections in November tends to get a better turnout. We have worked with communities that have done debt exclusion votes and have intentionally done debt exclusion votes at a different time than the November election. So you should think of this as like a range, and that's why this piece, which is the MSBA vote, I will say the MSBA, once you've gotten to here, they're kind of, I think there's only one time in the entire history of the MSBA they have not voted to support a project. I mean, they're here at this point, and we tend to look to them to help us schedule the vote around what's going to be best for your vote. I've had communities that are like, well, we absolutely want the MSBA to vote before we have our vote, because we want to be able to say, the MSBA voted, now we get to, right? And there have been others who are like, no, we want to have the community vote and the MSBA vote. So again, both of these are kind of a range. So, any questions about that before we go to what's next? Does that make sense?
Just write down your question, you can ask at the end.
Okay, so what's next? Okay, so I'm not going to go into all the details here, but suffice to say, the MSBA has this kind of train of districts that are coming in and you have to hop on your place on the train as soon as you can. So this is the timeline they gave us, which feels aggressive in the summer, but what they have said is if we are able to get the designer RFS to them no later than July 11th, and they made the point, it's first come, first serve, then we would be on the schedule, which would get us to taking in designer applications in September, and then there would be interviews in October. So by mid to late October, you would have the designers on board. So I want to pause here and say, so one of the things that should happen here tonight. Because of that schedule and because you are not scheduled to meet again until August, we put on the agenda a vote on authorizing a designer subcommittee. So Rick, Nate, do you want to talk about that at all? Your thoughts about it?
So, we are gonna do, we're gonna do that now, I guess. We have, we sent, I think all of you got the email asking about interest. We heard from the same folks who were on the OPM selection committee, so Paul Pacheco, who's not here tonight, Matt, Betsy, Anthony, Lisa, Jen, I didn't know if you wanted to come back for more.
Yes, sure.
But I didn't want to kind of, limit it to that. If other people are interested, you'd like, Beth Ann, you'd like to be? See? I will be on the committee, but in all likelihood, I will be a non-voting member because I'll be conflicted out by professional relationships. I'll help kind of guide the conversation and help you guys understand things, but I probably will not be voting. So we'll add Jenna, Z, and Beth Ann. I did.
And just to clarify, this subcommittee is developing request for services.
Correct. And then select it, well.
So then, I think what's gonna happen is, we'll get these applications in September, we can talk about in August whether we wanna bring a summary of the applications to the committee to comment on before they go back, because they come in, we tend to review them and develop kind of.
Matrix.
We do a matrix, but I think the most important thing is to sort of have bullet points or talking points about what the committee, either the whole committee or the subcommittee, thinks about the different applicants, because then there's the interviews involve a kind of round table of folks from the MSBA and 3 representatives of this building committee. So there's 3 of you and there's about 10 of the rest. And so it's really important to go into that meeting having your talking points clear and representative of the committee's opinion for that conversation. Because being like very concise and on point really helps that conversation.
So I would make a motion to authorize a designer selection committee of the Salem Building Committee, composed of the folks I mentioned, Paul Pacheco, Matt Micah, Betsy Delaney, Lisa Golden, Jenna I, Beth Ann Cornell, and Z. This is Alabama. To undertake the effort to complete and provide the designer RFS to the MSBA no later than July 11th.
Looking for a second? Mario? Any questions? Last chance to step
Jump
down
on the committee.
or step down. Last chance.
Or I confirm you're standing on the sidelines, give it to them.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. So we're gonna keep coming, every time we have a meeting, we're gonna come back to that schedule and it's gonna get more and more things overlaid on it. We kept it, pretty diagrammatic for tonight. Deborah, was there anything else we wanted to talk about before we passed on from here? Oh, I know what it was. So I think, this isn't about the designer selection timeline, but I think, I've had a chance to have a single conversation with the mayor about how the project gets managed. And I made a recommendation to him that you create a finance subcommittee. And the reason for that is that it's sort of little at first, but grows into a sort of big piece of the project. There's going to be a monthly process of looking at invoices and requisitions, which, at first is just consultants, but then it grows bigger. I definitely recommend the group of the size that you have a finance subcommittee. So, Mayor, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I think it's not a committee that's making decisions in terms of financial matters. It's reviewing the invoices.
It's making the wheels go around.
Right, and then recommending whether or not they're okay to be approved.
Could that committee include a city council? Or no? We're talking just, okay.
No, I
yeah.
kind of did discussion with Margaret and the team. I think we're looking at No, having Elizabeth Pauley, Anna Friedman, and Lisa Goldman serve as the committee.
They're entrenched.
Fiscal finance?
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, you don't need to vote on this tonight, that's a recommendation. If people want to think about that, we can bring it back to the next meeting. If it's good to go, we would have a kickoff meeting with Anna and Lisa, and Elizabeth is not here. So that's the other subcommittee.
Well, I mean, if. Oh, okay.
Do we need to have advertised that?
To have advertised the vote,
Yeah.
we can put it on for the August meeting.
Yeah, it's not urgent. Okay, next slide, Nancy. Oh, okay. So, this is just to set the table for a sort of larger discussion, but we thought, one of the ways in which we've seen these projects get off to at least what can be a confusing start is around reimbursement rate. And I don't know if you all know, but the reimbursement rate for this project is a smidge under 74 points. What's called the MSBA calls the base reimbursement rate. So I went looking for a comparable example of a comparable size project with a comparable reimbursement rate, and I discovered, probably shouldn't have been surprising, that the Somerville High School project has a lot of similarities. So this was the total project cost, so that's construction and soft costs, right? That was their base reimbursement rate. This is what the grant ended up being. So, and the effective rate was around 50%. So we're going to have a lot more discussions about this, and I can speak a little bit to the why of this. But in a nutshell, it's way too early to have public conversations about this. As Rick pointed out, there's a place where we're going to do that. But for this committee to know, it's very easy to get confused between what the MSA gives you as base rate and what it actually ends up being. And I will tell you, for people who are math nerds, the nugget of it is that the MSBA always caps the reimbursement on construction below the actual construction. So you might know they did a big bump this year, biggest bump that they've ever done, right? But the current cap, which I think is $650, $660 a square foot, is gonna fall by the time you, remember that timeline for when you're bidding? By the time you've gone to bid, like a project bidding today is probably on average bidding around $850 a square foot. But if for a project bidding 3 years from now, you're really probably talking about $1,000 a square foot. So that difference between the cap and what you actually bid at, that is not reimbursed. And that's why there's such a big difference between the reimbursement rate and the effective reimbursement rate. And by the way, this isn't even my slide. I stole this from someone else's presentation. I was like, bingo. But it does kind of explain kind of the overview. And again, we'll have a lot more conversations about this, but I just wanted people to know here that that's kind of something that we need to dig into and we need to understand. So I'm sure questions about that before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Holy Mario. Yeah. So
I bet you know something about this.
I do know something about this. I was the project lead for the school during this project. One thing to note that the bigger difference was, you gotta remember this was done during COVID, so there was a lot of costs that we incurred.
Right.
We had no idea we could even incur them. So that is a big difference. And the other question is, didn't the MSBA relax its rules around grant reimbursement? So if we were to get grants for other parts of this project, they no longer take that from our total?
That is a really good point. I'm working on a project in Amherst.
Can you say that again? Yes. So before, I believe it's this year that they kind of relaxed their rules around this. When Somerville went for the project, they were doing a lot of green additions to it, solar and not offshore wind, but wind hydroponics and stuff. They could have gotten grant funded from other grants, other federal grants to do those, but they would not be reimbursed by the MSBA, so they would count that against their total reimbursement, where now you got it from somewhere else, don't worry, we can cover something else.
Yeah. And I think that's been partly in response to the tax credits, right? So, in Amherst, we don't know what the value is gonna be, but they're gonna go for all of the tax rates they can get. But I will also say it does help, but it doesn't move the needle by 10%, right? It might move the needle by 5% if you're lucky, so just for context. Other questions?
At what point are you somewhat confident that you know what that percentage is that you would want to go public?
Well, in general, the best thing to do is to talk about what you're getting, not about what you're not getting. So that, to me, is the first rule of thumb. You sort of go public with we will be getting X, right? And I think going into the details of the math is good for this committee to understand. But I would say by the time, was it you, Matt, who asked about, no, maybe Rick, about when we do the estimates. We can do estimates of the value and know, again, what the MSBA contribution, the estimated contribution would be at the end of that first phase when you're looking at options.
But the further you go along, the more confident you are in that.
That's right. No. That's right. But the math, I will tell you, is not really complicated. I mean, I did a version of it for the interview just to sort of test it out. And yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna see something not dissimilar to this.
Meaning an effective reimbursement rate of around 50%, which is, we did it on a bunch of projects to test it out, so it's not uncommon.
Two questions. So, are we certain that direct pay tax credits for energy systems, for example, are this considered the same as grants in that they?
Yes, I have that in writing. Yes. Actually, you know what I did on Amherst? I wrote them a letter saying, we believe that these things are sort of within bounds. And shortly after that, they came out with a policy. Basically what they used to do was if you got rebates, they took it off the top of their share. They don't do it anymore.
And the second question is, it's not just the cap, but there's also, there are elements of the project that may not be considered reimbursable by MSBA at all.
So perfect example is my gym example, right? So if you wanted to build new, if you have the size that you have, the MSBA would say 1,200 kids, this many square feet of gym, we'll pay for this piece and you can pay 100% for the rest. So everything gets space tested against their space testing.
What about abatement cost?
Abatement cost is included.
It is.
Yeah, and in fact, the reimbursement on demolition tends to be very good because it's sort of treated as a sort of standalone item.
There's certain things like that are maintenance related abatement costs that they, like flooring, it's one of the things they say that should have been taken care of, but the larger ones are typically.
Which I will say tends to affect older schools because that's where you find, they have a real thing, which I guess I understand about asbestos floor tile, and which you see in buildings this age, right? But I don't think not so much in buildings the age of the high school. Right?
There is.
There's some, so they will exclude asbestos floor tile.
Which I think it just has to do with their mantra that, these things should have been taken care of, like we should, but that's small compared to usually the other stuff.
Yeah, don't wait for us to come pay for it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, thank you.
And Somerville's a perfect example of why they reused the gym. They rebuilt a new building around the gym.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other? We'll have more discussion. This is the entry point. Okay, so what's next?
Any future meetings?
Deborah, you want to talk about that?
Yep. So, in terms of future meetings, we've just laid out the upcoming months. Now, I would caveat this by saying, or restating what Margaret said earlier, is that once the designer's on board and has opinions about what the schedule needs to be, you know, and potentially, more, it's really, that's the biggest question mark right now. This could change, but this is just something that we will continue to update so that this committee can see what's coming up, and especially in terms of your involvement in these monthly meetings, right? And then the stuff that's happening in between, because we'll flesh out a larger milestone schedule with the things that are happening in between. So I know there's a discussion about no meeting being scheduled in July. And then on the 15th, discussion of the status of the designer selection, you know, the RFS that will be completed by then. And then a discussion of project opportunities. And I'm going to go back to that in a second, but you can see on here, there's just some thoughts about, and this, you can overlay this on the schedule that Margaret showed earlier, right? So when you take a look at this on the slide deck that you could have access to, you can just take a look at this and think about your schedules around it. And then in 2025, we just noted that there may need to be added meetings to the schedule in terms of the approvals and how, you know, we can talk more about the approval process and how you want to do that in Salem and who that happens with, but there may be additional meetings.
Right, I just wanted to clarify that probably nobody remembers, at our last meeting, we did talk about Dr. Zoik had asked me to set up the third Thursday of the month, which we all agreed that was working the best. So after tonight, if we all agree that those are the meetings going forward without the additional ones in 2025, then I'll send a calendar invite to everyone so that you'll have them on your calendar.
Right.
Is it possible to get, I know it's not on stone, that things may change, but is it possible to get a copy of a couple of slides to project the meeting upcoming, not when they send the agenda, but, you know, have a vision of what's coming up?
This or something, or you guys?
Yeah, these.
Yeah.
I think dates and the timeline is also really important.
Right.
To keep it in mind.
So I think on this, you have the access, show the access to.
Right, I
this slide
didn't
deck.
have this on here, but
Oh,
I'll
you
add
have
this.
it.
Right.
Yes, so we'll add, so thank you.
Or when you send the minutes
Yeah.
to me,
We'll have all of this
the
stuff.
link to this will be there.
Yeah,
And like I
actually-
said, all the dates will come out ahead of time. So the third Thursday of the month, everybody will have that on their calendar.
Right.
But she'll also share the slides,
We'll
which
share the
gives you a little
slides,
more of the timeline.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, Liz, you know what, Perla got a copy of this. And I think,
She gets a copy too. She
Oh, you
gets
do?
everything that Perla gets.
oh, okay, then
Yeah,
I may
they're
not
like
have
one.
included you in the distribution. We'll make sure you get it.
Oh, that-
Everybody else in the committee got a copy
Okay.
of this on Monday.
We're a duo.
You're due.
In separate parts.
Okay.
But on the calendar invite, I have her on there, so she gets everything that I send. That's
So,
why I said
and-
the calendars were the best.
But to that point, we will have, we will start to have a schedule that will be part of every meeting we have that is outlining these milestones that are coming up. And we can, you know, and if things have to move, we'll explain that, so.
Because it seems that, you know, you have those dates, but we also need to put the dates to do the community engagement.
In between,
And-
of course.
In between and see
Right.
how we are going to do that.
Yes.
And representing the Latino community takes a lot of work, so we don't want to be so close to the deadline.
Sure. Yes, and we can talk about those as
Deborah, if I may, can I have these slides for the website?
yeah.
Yep.
That'd be
Yep.
great. I'd
Yeah,
love to
of
have
course. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, that's just general, but we want to go back up and talk about the next meeting on the 15th in terms of discussion of project opportunities. So I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret and mainly Kim Carter to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just to, as Deb mentioned, poor Betsy has had her look at the sun forever. You know, for the August meeting, we want to take the time that we have with you to talk about opportunities, but for tonight, we wanted to give Kim a chance to
talk about, and Kim, you have a handout, right? Thank you. Why don't you give me the handout, and then why don't you talk a little bit about,
If you're following along on the agenda, we're on number 11, we'll come back to number 10.
So introducing Kim Carter.
So we had a chance to speak with Dr. Wright. It was the first time that I've met him, although I've heard lots of things about him. And between that conversation and research that I did in preparation for the interview, I have to say, I've been really impressed with the work you've done in the district. I read your NEASC accreditation report from last year. I've read the strategic plan that's been updated. I've looked at the portraits of a middle school graduate, of a high school graduate. Looked at these documents, and between that and I have to say, based on the conversation with Dr. Rick, I dug into the middle school 8th grade pilot some more, which is pretty fascinating. We hope at some point to get more student input, get student stories about learning, particularly in that pilot, as well as some of the other really neat things that are going on already, so that you can highlight those and capitalize on those. At the top of the handout, I put the mission and the values from the strategic plan. First of all, because I personally think they're brilliant, so that was easy, but also because you've done a lot of community engagement around those, from what I've read. And they should serve as your through line for what you want to do educationally. There's a quote that I used at the interview that Margaret gave me that I really like. It's from Winston Churchill, who says, "We shape our buildings and then they shape us." And you think about running school in a building that was designed 50 years ago. It shapes what you can do. So it's important to be thinking about those things. So one of the things that Rick asked for, as I understand it, through Margaret,
I'm sure I did.
was some examples. So my thinking, and I mentioned this to Dr. Reich, is that what I've done, what we found to be really effective in some other communities is to curate collections of examples of things that are being done in other educational settings and schools. So when people come to the design meetings, they have some shared understanding of the things that they like and they want and that they're looking for. For instance, we use the phrase project-based learning a lot. That has a whole range of presentations and meanings to people. The more you get some shared understanding of what it means for you here in Salem, the more coherence you'll have going into that design process. That's just one little example. So looking at your mission, looking at your values, thinking about the size of Salem High School, the configurations, I'll come back to configuration in a minute, but these were the 4 examples that made the most sense to start with. I'll confess, I surprised myself. They weren't on my top list. But they're a really good place to get some ideas. I want to be really clear, in no way, shape, or form am I saying go adopt this from any one of these. They are, as I said at the top, sparks for consideration. The other sparks that we really want to put into the mix is stories from Salem students. So that you have these 2 conversations, or these 2 different types of sets of data to be looking at for what's possible here. I will also say both Drs. Reich and Lisa really spoke to the fact that Salem is not a traditional based community, that Salem is open to innovation and is interested in being the best you can be for all of your kids. The equity really shines through in your strategic plan and all of your conversations. So I was looking for settings that focus on those 3 values and really highlight them. I was also looking for settings that build on the kinds of things that you're already doing, that you aspire to do more of, and are aligned with the kinds of things coming out of the 8th grade middle school pilot, for example. So the first 3 in particular are the ones to have to pause and say, I'm an educator, right? You probably could tell by this, the voice, but also the handout, right? And so, no educator doesn't give you homework. So if you have a chance before the August meeting to go in and just dig around a little bit and look, it'll make our work together in August a little bit more efficient. But I will bring more materials for August to dig into these sites. The 4th one is there. It has a lot of overlap. It espouses the same values. It looks a little different, but I really wanted you to see their growth. They designed for 460 kids, and they now serve over 6,000 kids through a network. None of these sites are as big as Salem, but that doesn't mean there aren't things in there to look at. And just think to yourself as you're looking, what resonates for you? What sparks ideas from there? What are things that are already happening here that you don't want to lose as you move forward? Because there's a lot of good stuff here. So that's the intention. And then at the bottom, just a little piece to be thinking about, like, it's almost like a fortune cookie, so I apologize, it's that kind of simple, but if you think about what are the currencies that are gonna buy success in this really unknown future that we're all on the cusp of, these are 3 things to be thinking about. Typically with schools, we think about the competencies, the knowledge and skills kids need to have, and those are absolutely critical. But think also about the idea of connections. Those human networks that we build are absolutely critical to our lives. And then certifications. And I know you're already doing some things here, so that's what the handout is about, and what we will spend some time at the August 15th meeting doing.
So this is kind of to seed the approach to the August meeting, because again, we'll be on our way to a designer selection, but not done. Kim is going to be doing some of this work that she's describing with the superintendent and staff, which is great for the project because the designer will bring with them someone to help with programming, but in fact, in this period of time, we also need to develop the educational program for the project. So that's Kim's role.
Kim, any of the, this is great, thank you, but as you looked at these schools, was there how much of an emphasis was there on wellness?
I would say there's a strong emphasis at all of those on wellness. Yeah. Community is really critical in all of them. That's the High Tech High example was an example of how they've taken a large number of kids and made personalized communities. And there are other, if there are particular things you don't see in here you would like examples of, we can find them. But this was a starting point. But yes, wellness is absolutely key to belonging, which is key to equity and opportunity.
So I think in August, we're going to sort of split that 2 hours between talking about the larger opportunities of the project and talking about some of the educational opportunities and getting feedback from all of you. Because again, Kim will be doing some of this work with the superintendent and his staff. So that's it for that slide. What's next? Oh. Okay, I guess I'll talk about this. This was a slide that we had in the we had at the interview, and we also gave this handout, which is a little easier when you see this handout. But relative to the question of how do you look at options, this is a model for you to think about. Most of the projects that we've worked on have had some version of this, where a set of options are identified and then they kind of get very carefully ranked by the committee. In this case, this was from a project in Amherst that is just about to start construction, so this was in the way back room for them. But the committee spent a lot of time identifying this list of what their sort of key drivers were for comparing options. And in fact, this folded out, there were like 20 items, but they sort of rolled up to critical items. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's just to sort of say, if you're wondering what the process looks like when you start looking at options, this is a good model. And the designer will have opinions about this too, but we'll probably end up looking at something like this. There'll be some number of columns comparing options, and the work of the committee is going to be to figure out what the priorities are against which the options will be measured. That was all I was going to say.
Neil? Neil has a question.
Just in terms of like that frame, that matrix, is it anticipated that you, along with the design team, will be, as part of like the early process, helping in terms of speaking with the community to help identify what those priorities are?
Yeah. You know, there's a great tool. Is anybody familiar with Mentimeter? No?
Yeah.
You're probably going to see Mentimeter as part of the community engagement. Mentimeter is a great tool for having a public meeting and then asking people to rank in a meeting their priorities, so you can sort of see live action community engagement. But yeah, what we did in Amherst was we had several public meetings where we asked for people's reaction to their priorities, and we sort of folded in everything. And frankly, the public thinking didn't drift very far from, you know, the committee's perception. It's sort of, it's a community, something that rises up from the sort of community feeling of what's important. So yeah, this is a tool for that, although the version that we used with the public didn't look as kind of gritty.
So if we have 2 hours on the 15th, and Camden's given us our homework for 1 of the hours, to think about the research, to think about the educational side. The other hour is brainstorming, you know, what are our top 5 priorities for the site and for Salem and for the building. That's like starting to populate this list.
It is.
So we should be thinking about what's important to Neil and Jenna and Matt. And
Exactly.
everybody should be thinking about what is important to them in this project and be ready to kind of share.
And we'll send out some structure for that meeting ahead of time. But that's how we want to use the August meeting.
Typically, our meetings have been 6:30 to 8 o'clock, so I just want to double check on the 2-hour time, because that was not. Are we?
We'll bring snacks.
So me.
Fine.
But I mean, how are we managing that time? Because I would need to know that for the calendar.
You want to say 6 to 8? Is 6 problematic for anyone?
Is that just for August or going forward?
I would say for this 2-hour meeting.
Yeah, just for this one.
Oh, just for August,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
I think we'll try and keep. It's really hard to maintain everybody's focus for more than an hour and a half, which we are 1 minute away from. 1 minute away. We started at 6:30, right?
No,
Right, so we've only put in
We're
an
an
hour.
hour.
Okay, so we're doing well. Okay, what's next?
So we're gonna go 6 o'clock. Is that?
On August 15th.
If it's problematic, let's not.
Does
Is
that
that-
work for people
Yeah.
coming from Boston or elsewhere?
Would you want to go 6:30 to 8:30?
No.
Good. Thank you. I don't either.
Thank you for that audible down there.
Yeah, there were a couple of opinionated.
Well, I'm also thinking of the city hall folks.
Questions is next.
Questions is next. So that is the end of our presentation. Anthony.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mara made me feel guilty, so please ask me.
At what point, I'm sure MSBA will let us know when the time comes, but at what point do we need to identify the 3 members of the 3 representatives of the city that will be part of the county? I know they're old, it has to be school committee, superintendent, and mayor, or designee, but at what point do we need to?
Yeah, they usually ask that about 2 weeks ahead of the actual interviews. So we got some time. Probably by the time we're reviewing the applications, Well, so I take it back. September 24th, they're saying would be a meeting in which 3 representatives of the city would participate. So it would be, let's call it 2 weeks before September 24th, would be when they would ask us to name names. Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan. Thank you. Welcome aboard, glad to have you.
We are thrilled to be here.
So we're going to, you're good, right? So we're gonna go to Beth Ann and Lisa. Okay?
So maybe 2 minutes, just so we can switch laptops?
Sure.
If people need to stretch or whatever.
So how are we doing this here? Just HDMI?
Oh, he'll get me.
Oh, all right.
Just take yours off.
All right.
You just take yours away.
I think this might just be charged. Yeah. Throw that over there for now. No problem. Thank you. We'll watch the corner, right?
Yes, I'm jumping forward.
Oh, well,
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good. Go ahead.
All right, so we knew that Steve couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted to make sure that we gave an update on where he has been at with his community forums. And we all know that he had a very ambitious plan for these community forums and which audiences he was going to address. So we just wanted to give you an update since our April 25th meeting. He's had 5 different opportunities to meet with different members. So we had an in-person meeting, which some of you attended that one, that we had at Salem High. That was the very first one. Then there was a virtual meeting on Zoom. And I think that had about 40 people at it. It was probably approximate 40 attendance, 40 people attending. Some school building committee members, some not. And then they had an in-person meeting at Saltonstall, which I hear was very well attended. Beth Ann, would you say that was, again, about 40, 50? Right. Yep. And then we had our last quarterly meeting with central office. So we presented those same questions to the central office staff. And then I think it was yesterday, he sent me the notes from the teacher's advisory. I wasn't in attendance at that one. Were you?
I was not.
No. Okay.
How large is that group, teachers advisory?
I think it's about 10.
I was going to say, I think it's a representative from each school.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably not 40 people. And so as he took notes and we got attendance from every meeting, he kept forwarding to me and I kept asking people, send me your notes, send me the attendance. And Beth Ann and I worked on trying to pull out some threads that we've noticed already. So we'll start with the elementary grade configuration. I know some of you at the meeting, we broke it down into like 3 sections. For these purposes and for tonight, I tried to just squeeze it together. And one of the questions in some format or another was, what do you believe are the ideal elementary school configurations that will best prepare our youngest learners for middle and high school? The Early Childhood Center, pre-K to kindergarten. You want to take it, Beth Ann?
Yeah, that was very popular with most of our community members. And I also just want to say that our in-person meetings and our Zoom meeting just had a really diverse population. So it was a diversity of school representation, language, socioeconomics. It was a really wonderful mix of representation. So Early Childhood Center coupled with a pre-K and kindergarten is important for our purposes because we're just talking about all the space in the district, right? In order to do a 7 through 12, we have to think about what our other options are outside of this building project. So for the most part, I would say overwhelmingly families were really interested in having one central early childhood center in one building.
which actually would be great for us. We really struggle. We've got our pre-Ks kind of all over the place. Bentley is not really a viable building because it's going to be underwater at some point, and it's not a great building anyway. So this was good news for us to just see the community support around this option.
And even when I was at the central office meeting, some of the folks there were saying that they liked that the regulations and guidelines for 3 to 5 year olds, all of those in one building would be fantastic. And then there were, as I went through the notes, there were quite a few mentions of the North Andover pre-KK. Is anybody familiar with that site or location? I know. So I put it on there just because it came up in several different forums. And then these were some of the challenges that people brought up.
Yeah, the loss of unique learning opportunities, which I think folks meant that like the loss of opportunities for their kindergartners to be part of the larger elementary experience. And yeah, the process of choosing an elementary school is also a little complicated in the district. And so families felt like they were a little bit afraid that this would complicate it further. I tend to think that it will simplify it if we have one centralized location, but it is an important concern for parents. Really smart questions about location and transportation. At the moment, we don't transport our littles, our pre-Ks on buses, so that would really affect us financially. We would have to do it. And finally, does this mean we close an elementary school? I think the school committee has talked in public meetings about the fact that we are operating more schools than we need. And so that will inevitably have to be a conversation that we continue to have. Yeah, and so this was the best conversation. So I was also really happy to see that people were pretty enthusiastic about 1 through 6 configuration, which would change all of our elementary schools. It would help keep our 6th graders in the district. We lose a lot of students after 5th grade to the charter, to private schools. So it would incentivize parents to sort of stay that extra year and then go to a fabulous 7 to 12 new high school. People do have concerns, you know, that 6th graders are too old for elementary school. There was only one person had that possibility of a 5 through 8 middle school. So I think even though
No,
was it a few?
it was, but it was like one person in maybe 4 out of the 5.
Okay.
I mean, all the notes are sitting
I
at
mean,
my
it was a
desk,
very
but
thoughtful, a really thoughtful
Right,
statement.
but
and,
yeah.
She sent us a follow-up email, which was interesting, but it's not really viable, I think, for our district. But I think the 1 through 6 configuration, people really were receptive to it. Is the next slide?
Next one is middle high school.
Concerns they had? Okay. I just want to go back to, on the last slide, educators had brought to our attention that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade standards are the same. So which I, as a school committee member, I'm not an elementary or middle school educator, so I didn't know this, that it does make academic sense to keep 6th, 7th, and 8th together because they're following the same standards. If they're in elementary school setting, the 6th graders would really be much different than the 1 through 5. The standards are completely different. So it's certainly not a reason not to have a 7 through 12. It just means that we have to be really mindful about what that meant for our 6th graders. And it could be sort of a really positive transition stage for our 6th graders to have a different set of standards, distinguish themselves from the 1 through 5. So I think there's a good opportunity there.
Good.
Yeah.
That's just to expand on that. It also, I think, would prepare them well for the transition to a new building. They came up to 7th grade and we're also moving to a whole other academic curriculum.
Absolutely.
They're continuing the program already. Good transition.
Yeah. Okay, next slide.
Oops, sorry. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so what folks were very focused on was they were receptive to having a 7 through 12, but nearly to a person, they wanted to make sure that 7th and 8th graders were not in the same spaces with 9 through 12s. And I think that there was also, the parents of younger kids had that concern, but we actually had a few high school kids show up and parents of high school students, and those parents also didn't want You know, they thought it would be strange to have their older kids who had a little bit more freedom and responsibility to be hanging around with middle school kids. So this was across the board, that there really needs to be some physical separation between our 7th and 8th graders and 9th through 12s. But everybody was very enthusiastic about sharing resources, particularly CTE resources, just being able to access all of the amazing stuff that we have here. And again, we'll keep kids in the district. If our middle schoolers can see the amazing equipment we have, they're gonna be less likely to put an application into Essex Tech. The 7th and 8th graders walking to Bertram for practice was an issue for all the parents. They did not like, they're like, it's fine if high school kids are walking down, you know, the street. They do not want middle schoolers walking down to Bertram. So this is a larger conversation about athletic spaces, which as the mayor knows, I talk about all the time. So yeah, it was, I think, overwhelmingly too, with a few exceptions, folks, I think recognize that 7th and 8th graders are a little too old for a K-8 model, and that can be difficult once you start getting those older grades. You know, you've got 5th graders around you, and it can be a little stunting, or, you know, they don't get that experience of really being, you know, independent older kids. Again, vertical curriculum alignment in middle school. Yeah, so overall, I would say it really is, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what the last one is.
One or two, there were one or two in some of the community forums are like, just leave it the way it is.
Sure, and I would say most of the people who were pretty interested in a, you know, a K-8 model, or a 6-8 model were really, Salt and Stall parents, because that's what they're used to. They've had a good experience at Salt and Stall. That's our only K-8 school. And people choose it for, you know, all kinds of important reasons. So those would just be when we're thinking culturally. I think a lot of our Latino parents really like that K-8 model. We heard that a lot at the forum at SALTS. We'd have to just be really mindful about how we create the kinds of supports that families view, you know, are looking for in a SALTS. And make sure that those kinds of supports exist in a you know, 1 through 6 and a 7-8 middle school.
Can I ask a question on the Bertram thing? What's the MSBA's approach on reimbursement for athletic facilities?
They don't.
I asked the answer.
Right.
Like,
They do not.
Academics only thing, right?
Doesn't the project include a bridge from the high school to Bertram?
Yeah,
Put a straight fence
We
up, go
wish.
straight down. Cheaper, right?
It probably would be.
Anything surprising? I mean, all this might get so far out, but when I look at this, nothing is really surprising. Was there anything surprising that you?
Not really. The only thing that actually did surprise me was how receptive parents were to kind of blowing up the system that we have. And that was, I think, pretty across the board. Nobody was really kind of digging in and saying like,
Yeah.
we
No.
can't change any of this. It
There was way more positive than negative.
Very positive.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you might have you were there for it, but was it similar with the teacher advisory group?
It was a lot of positive. They were the ones that brought up the vertical curriculum alignment. I think one of the comments on there that I didn't add to this was the teaching, the staff, what's going to happen, the sharing of resources. But we all know that means there might be less of certain teachers because some teachers will have a schedule where they're teaching on the middle and the high school end, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I think there was. But I wasn't at that meeting, so I can't really. Steve could comment on that more.
Forums, oh, sorry, I just wanted to add on to that is we had a lot of teacher representation at all the forums.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Including
it wasn't
union.
Just teacher advisory.
Yeah.
And they were great. Their insight was really helpful. I think most of them, all of the teachers that I heard from said a K-8 model is not really working. We should probably change that in the district. And they were all receptive to 7 through 12. They could really, I think everyone could see that the potential for shared resources and just giving our 7 and 8s opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have. I think teachers were pretty supportive.
Rick?
Jen, good.
Sorry, Nate.
I was at one of these and I it was really interesting to kind of see, and it sounds like from this, people are kind of, since I've been in Salem, people are very focused on their elementary schools, right? They're always like very protective of their elementary school and its model. And they've always been like, well, yeah, maybe when my kid gets to high school, I'll go to private, or I'll go to one Catholic, but they don't. And it was really good to see people start thinking about high school, like, and the point of like how important middle school, high school is. And they're all like, well, yeah, all the elementary schools are, they all have ended up admitting, even though they love their elementary school, that they're all good, and that this idea of like, let's focus on the higher grades now, and get people focused on like, come together.
Yep.
One of the topics that came up in the group, the one that I attended around this question, was that you only get, we haven't had a bite at the MSBA apple in 30 years. And if we don't address the middle school as part of this project, we're not gonna get another bite at the apple in any of our kind of time at the school. And so if we're not gonna do the middle school now, when do we do it and who pays for it? So it's something to consider when we think about this grade reconfiguration question. I know it's more money, but it's only gonna cost more later, and we're gonna have to pay for it ourselves if we don't do it for this.
I think to that point, Rick, it also, as I was going through a lot of these forums, I was thinking it really, I think, is important to frame that argument for community members as well, because we have a lot of opportunities with the buildings that we have online right now to do things differently, to have, you know, a better space for New Liberty and the Salem Prep, to have that K through that pre-KK space, and just being able to be a little bit more flexible and creative with the buildings that we all have online right now. You know, will create opportunities for all kids in Salem, whether it's your kids still in elementary school or they're ready to take that middle school step. So I think framing that for people, like, here's our building situation, you know, here are the things we could be doing with these buildings that we're not doing. You know, a lot of our buildings aren't being, most of our buildings, I think with the exception of Bentley, aren't being used, right, to their maximum capability.
Full capacity, right.
So it's so many opportunities we have.
So the last bucket before is intra-district choice, which probably might, should we go ahead, or do you want to?
No, you go.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment, sure. And it's that I think looking at the buildings is good, but you know, being a counselor at Salem High, I think the discrepancies in the curriculums and in the grading, it was also at points like traumatic, and having the opportunity of have this 7 to 12, not just buildings, but selling to the community how that's going to unify the curriculum and then give them more success to attain either college or a trade. I think that I also want to frame it that way from my point of view.
So the last bucket was intra-district choice.
This wasn't fun.
No, yeah, that's why I saved it for last.
This is just a hornet's nest. You know, so I think across the board, and this is why I love this community so much, everybody said the wonderful thing about school choice is that we can create socioeconomic balance at every single one of our schools, and that's what everyone values. It didn't matter who you were talking to, everyone said that is the most valuable thing about this system. And everybody had suspicions that it doesn't work out as equitably as it should, and they are right. And so we know that from, you know, sort of, the school committee has been trying to dig through this for the past, in the past year. And even though this doesn't have a kind of direct relationship to this building process, it is tangentially related. It will have an effect on, you know, I think retention in the district. I think it will, you know, to your point, like making people feel like all of these elementary schools are doing similar things, that are preparing our 7th graders appropriately, that are then leading them into our high school. And all our elementary schools are very good, but they are all doing, you know, they're getting to the point where they're trying to be more streamlined, but there is still a perception, and this came up quite a lot, that not every school is the same. And so that's, people get squeezed out of certain schools. In part, that's actually true with Carleton, not so much some of the other schools. They had really good points about having different start and end times, that because of the populations that we have and their work schedules, and we have a really transient population here, sometimes people are moving in and out at different times, and they need to choose their bus schedule and their school based on when it starts. And folks were pretty nervous about us having just sort of everything the same, everything starts and ends at the same time, because that wouldn't help with our equity and inclusion and opportunity that are so important for us. So everybody brought up really good points. The notion that Salem offers a lot of diverse school models, I think probably was true 20 years ago when I was first investigating schools for my kids. It's less so now. I think, our schools are actually more aligned than they've ever been. But there are some different, Carleton's a little bit different. SALT is different with the K-8 model. But again, there's that equity piece, right? If you can't get into a K-8, and you really want that K-8, where you don't have any other options. So if you really want the Carleton Innovation Plan because you need your child to start early because you can't afford daycare, it's very complicated and ends up having some unintended inequitable effects. And folks really, I think, in this community really understand both benefits and drawbacks.
Oh, good.
Oh, I just thought it was interesting how many, and I guess I understood it, but I think it just keeps coming to head with the housing issue, how many parents I heard talk about, you don't want to have to think about having because it's so hard to find the right house and to be able to afford a house. If school is a factor, that makes it that much harder to be in Salem. And as you were saying, time too. It's like the things that should be taken off the table. And a lot of parents like the choice, but also felt a huge burden of the choice. Oh, you have that.
Yeah, that came up a lot.
Right.
That the researching, super stressful, trying to figure out where they can get their best information from. That was a thread throughout.
Right. And a lot of that is on us as a school district to have our parent information center be, I think, we just have to be more communicative, more supportive of all of the different diverse families that we have. What did come up, and I think that you and I talked about this, Lisa, but I probably should have said to put it on the list too, is a lot of people, and I thought about this a lot too, is having a sort of more controlled choice where you have 3 options, and sort of break it out. We've talked about, we're partnering with the city to kind of figure this out. Oh, is it on there?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I put it as a merit.
Awesome, thank you. Everybody would have access to Bentley because it has a different enrollment policy. It's just sort of a lottery. So you'd always have Bentley as an option and maybe 2 other ones, and that would still help us to have our be able to diversify our schools socioeconomically. So I think those are things we're all gonna have to think about, but again, leading to this project, I think having not necessarily neighborhood schools, but at least when folks are, still have choice, but a little bit closer, will have an effect on our enrollment going forward. And so I have every expectation just based on how wonderful Dr. Zweig is and a lot of the changes that we're going to make, despite the fact that the birth rate's going down, that we are going to have higher enrollment, at least at the high school. I think we're gonna end up keeping a lot more kids once we start making some of these choices.
And that was all that I had, because I'm assuming as he goes forward and has more community forums, then we would have an update to this.
But I do think that we're in pretty good shape because these forums are actually follow-up to similar forums that we had 3 years ago. So we have a lot of community data and there is a lot of transparency. Everybody knows what we're talking about and what's on the table.
That's it.
That's it.
That is it.
Any questions? Any other questions?
One quick one.
Please.
In the area, who has combined 7 and 12? School district.
Saugus.
In the area, we know what district has 7 to 12. Do we know any district in this area?
Saugus is the most recent.
And there's private schools that have some.
The exam schools at Boston are also.
Interesting.
Right, at one of the forums, somebody brought up KIP.
Yeah.
KIP is
Kip's
7 to
definitely
12.
involved. And
Yeah.
we've talked about that as a school committee, about getting folks from some of those 7 to 12 school districts in to talk to us about what the drawbacks and benefits are. We have talked a little bit to the KIP folks. They're great and really helpful.
And we had a subcommittee, or a committee of the whole for the school committee about the assignment school choice policy. And we can show that meeting, the data from that meeting and that content with members for this committee.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
Other issues not anticipated by the chairs. What the heck is that? Oh, sorry.
I was wondering if I could ask a question of the
No,
committee.
so we're gonna move on to the.
Has anyone other than the 2 people that have already let you know been contacted by any of the unsuccessful OPM firms? No? Okay.
No.
I was just curious.
Just you.
No, that's
Oh, you
me.
weren't.
They're not contacting me.
Oh.
They contacted
Other people.
2 members of the committee that aren't me, but not me. And then I'm just curious how far reaching that probably was. So, okay, thank you.
If they do, redirect them.
Yeah, I interviewed 4 or 5 of the unsuccessful firms already, so I'm happy to tell them why they weren't selected. But, yeah.
So seeing that there's no public members here, right? Can we move from the public here? There's no need for public comment. Any last minute thoughts, questions, epiphanies? No? So our next meeting is scheduled for August 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the high school, I'm assuming? TBA, here?
Wherever they're here.
More than likely, since it's gonna be August
Okay.
and there is no AC in the Salem High Library. So I think I'm gonna try to confirm this.
Again, I want to thank
Just in case,
Anson.
yeah.
Thank you, glad to have you on board.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you. And I just need a motion to adjourn. Second? All those in favor? All those opposed? All right. See everyone, thank you. It's a very summer-